All right, diving right in. South Korea, last month, martial law. It happened.
Yeah, it was a pretty short period, thankfully.
Super short, but still. I mean, this is South Korea we're talking about. K-pop, cutting-edge tech, they have a pretty solid democracy, right?
Yeah, they do, yeah.
And then suddenly, bam, military rule. So, like, what does this whole thing even tell us about their commitment to things like social harmony and, equity?
Well, I think it really brings to light how fragile the balance can be between, national security and individual freedoms.
Okay, so break that down for me a little, because when I hear martial law, I think, like, soldiers on the streets. What does it actually mean for, like, everyday people?
Right. So at its core, martial law is really the suspension of ordinary law, right?
Right.
The military basically steps in. They have the authority to kind of maintain order, control.
Okay, so it's not just like a visual thing.
No, not at all. We could be talking restrictions on gatherings, curfews, limits on movement, even like monitoring communications.
Wow. So that sounds like it could really disproportionately impact communities that are already marginalized.
Exactly.
Like, we're talking ethnic minorities, the LGBTQ plus community, migrant workers. I mean, these are groups that often already face discrimination.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big concerns, right? When you have a situation like this, it can exacerbate those existing inequalities.
So it's almost like hitting pause on all the progress that's been made.
In a way, yeah. Think about it. If advocacy groups, the support networks for these communities, they're suddenly restricted, maybe even silenced because of martial law.
Right.
Who's speaking up for them then? And then on top of that, you have increased military presence. So there's a higher risk of like profiling, targeting based on ethnicity or, other characteristics.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought. Can you talk more about how, like, specifically martial law could affect these groups?
Sure. Well, imagine, for example, if you have, organizations that are working to challenge discriminatory practices. Suddenly it becomes much harder for them to do that under martial law. Minority voices could get suppressed.
Right.
And we might even see setbacks in things like legal protections, the social acceptance that's been gained.
Yeah. And, like, what if this hadn't been temporary?
Right.
What if this had gone on longer? Could it have actually, like, undone all the work that's been done towards diversity and inclusion in South Korea?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, a prolonged period of martial law could mean a real regression when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Wow. And it's not just South Korea itself, right? I mean, this has implications for, like, the whole region.
Absolutely. Think about it. South Korea is often held up as a model, right, for development, for democracy in the region.
Right.
If they can implement martial law, even briefly, it might embolden other nations that are facing their own political instability to, consider doing the same thing.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, potentially. It could have a real impact on democratic freedoms, inclusivity across multiple countries.
Okay, but on a slightly more positive note, South Korea did act pretty quickly to retract that martial law declaration.
They did, yeah.
So, I mean, does that tell us anything about their commitment to democratic values?
Well, it definitely suggests that there's a certain level of resilience in their democratic institutions. I mean, you had that public outcry, you had swift parliamentary actions against the martial law. Those are pretty encouraging signs. It shows that, people are willing to speak up, they're willing to defend their rights. That's a good thing.
So it's like a kind of a mixed bag then. I mean, there's definitely concern, but also like this glimmer of hope.
Exactly. It really underscores how even in democracies that are, considered established, things can change very quickly. And it just reinforces the importance of constant vigilance, right? When it comes to protecting those democratic values, protecting the rights of every citizen.
It makes you think, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about, like, the impact on communities and the regional stuff. But what about South Korea's image globally? I mean, they've worked really hard to cultivate this image of being like modern and progressive. Does this whole thing kind of tarnish that?
It's a good question. On the one hand, it definitely raises concerns about their commitment to, democratic principles,
Right.
which could definitely affect how other countries see them. Like, you could have investors getting a little wary, maybe even some diplomatic repercussions.
Okay, and what about the effect on their cultural exports? I'm thinking specifically, of course, about K-pop. I mean, it's huge globally, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's a big part of their, soft power. Could this event have an impact on that?
It's possible. Some fans might have trouble reconciling the image of a country that's under martial law with this, very upbeat and vibrant nature of K-pop.
Great.
There could be some backlash, especially from, those fans who really value freedom of expression
Yeah.
and see this event as kind of contradicting those values.
But K-pop has always been more than just like the catchy tunes and the dance moves.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's a reflection of Korean culture and society as a whole.
Absolutely. And Korean culture is very complex. It's multifaceted. I mean, K-pop has always tackled a lot of different themes, social issues, political commentary. It's definitely possible that this event could actually inspire artists to explore those themes even further.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, using their platform to maybe voice some concerns and advocate for change.
So K-pop could become a vehicle for dissent.
Yeah.
Or even like resistance.
It wouldn't be the first time that we've seen music used as a tool for, social commentary and political activism.
Right.
I mean, K-pop in particular has a history of kind of pushing boundaries and challenging norms. This situation could fuel a whole new wave of, creative expression that reflects what the Korean people are feeling, their anxieties, their hopes.
That's a really fascinating way to look at it. Like it takes this potentially negative thing and turns it into an opportunity.
Exactly. And I think it also speaks to the resilience of Korean culture. I mean, they faced a lot of challenges throughout history, and they've always found a way to express their identity, their resilience through art and through their music.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential negative impacts, but are there any positives when it comes to South Korea's global image? Could this be a catalyst for positive change?
It's definitely possible. The fact that there was such a strong public reaction against martial law, that in itself shows that people are really invested in those democratic freedoms.
Right.
This could lead to renewed efforts to strengthen democratic institutions, maybe increase transparency, make sure that something like this doesn't happen again.
So it's like a wake-up call, not just for South Korea, but for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds us that democracy is not something to be taken for granted, right?
Right,
It
yeah.
needs constant vigilance. It needs active participation from citizens and a willingness to defend our rights and freedoms. And that's a lesson that applies, not just in South Korea, but everywhere.
It's like we've gone through so many ideas, right? We talked about potential setbacks, the pushback, the power of culture and everything. But that idea of vigilance, that's the thing that's really sticking with me. How do we even make sure that this whole martial law thing, even though it was short, leads to something, better? How do we turn all this, uncertainty into positive change? For diversity, for inclusion, not just in South Korea, but everywhere.
That's the question, isn't it? And honestly, I think the answer is in understanding that social harmony and equity, those things aren't a destination. It's more like a journey, right? We have to stay informed, stay engaged, and be ready to challenge the status quo. This whole event, it's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. It can be fragile, and we can't just sit back and assume everything's okay.
So, okay, what does that actually look like? What can we do as people, as a global community, to support diversity and inclusion? And I mean, really do it, not just talk about it.
It begins with awareness. We need to educate ourselves about what marginalized communities are facing, understanding the history, recognizing the systemic issues. That's the first step. But then we have to go beyond just knowing about it. We have to move into action.
So it's not enough to just read a book or watch a documentary.
Right. We can support those organizations that are working directly with these communities, promoting diversity and inclusion. We can push for policies that protect everybody's rights. And I think most importantly, call out discrimination when we see it.
Yeah, but that can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Where do you even start?
It doesn't have to be this huge thing. Start small. Have conversations with your friends, your family. Be open and honest about these issues. Support businesses owned by people from marginalized communities. Pay attention to the words we use, the assumptions we make. Even the little things add up.
I like that. It's a good reminder that change really does start with us, right?
Right.
In our daily lives. Creating a culture of empathy, understanding, and respect, that's where it begins.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that every person has value, has dignity, no matter who they are, what they believe, or their identity. We can all work towards that no matter where we are in the world.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. This deep dive into South Korea and that whole martial law situation has been really eye-opening. We looked at what it means for social harmony, for equity, both within South Korea and globally. And we talked about the importance of democracy, being active citizens, and what we can do individually. I hope this has got you thinking, maybe even inspired you to do something. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.